So many of my clients who have a session on regression already have the peaceful place established from a previous session. If they do, fine, just take them back to the peaceful place and have them confirm when they're there. If they aren't there yet, if you have a script that you like and you use what you have. If you want to take a look at mine and adapt yours to be a combination of mine and yours, it's your choice. This isn't here because you have to use it. This is here for your use if desired. Question or comment?
Yeah. The way I've been doing it is, before they, before induction, in the pre-talk, basically, I ask them about a peaceful place and have them describe it to me, so that I can take them there, based on their description. So.
Charles Tibbetts taught us to do it that way.
I guess that's why I did it that way.
What I found is that as client, I sometimes jump from one peaceful place to another. I have about 5 or 6 different peaceful places, and yet I did it Charlie's way until I had a client who said, well, I know I described the beach to you, but when you told me to go to the beach, I found myself in the mountains instead. So interestingly enough, in the 7 years I worked part-time for the Franciscan Hospice doing hypnotherapy for terminal patients, I would do exactly what you did. I would have the patient describe a peaceful place and then use programmed imagery to guide the hospice patient to his or her peaceful place as described pre-trance. But I found out over 20 years ago that occasionally clients would go to a different place other than the one they described pre-trance. So I'll just let a client know, well, if you want me to, I can describe a mountain meadow to you, or a beach, or whatever place you choose, but many of my clients find they'd rather go someplace else when I ask them to go to a peaceful place. So sometimes I'll let the client tell me whether they want me to use a specific place or not, and it depends on the client.
So you might not know anything about their peaceful place?
No, I might not have a clue whether they're in the mountains or the beach. In fact, one time when the session was over, I said, where was your peaceful place? Oh, I was 1,000 feet beneath the surface of the ocean in a deep sea diving bell. Now that would really push the claustrophobic buttons for a lot of people, but that was her peaceful place. And another client, well, where was your peaceful place? Oh, I was flying a small airplane above the clouds over Seattle. He was a commercial pilot, and he had his own private plane that he loved to fly when he wasn't flying commercial jets. So one person's peaceful place can be another person's phobia. One man, his peaceful place was flying around the rings of Saturn in the Starship Enterprise. Another person's peaceful place was to be in spirit halfway between the Milky Way and the Andromeda Galaxy, because you can be anywhere in the universe in the imagination. One of my hospice patients' peaceful place was to be on the crystal beach in heaven where the sand was crystals, and the water was liquid light, and there was a golden castle a couple hundred yards down the shore, and that was a castle where Jesus lives. So I found some of the hospice patients were very detailed in their descriptions of a peaceful place. So if a client wants you to describe the peaceful place, great, but I now let the client make that choice. I don't just arbitrarily choose a peaceful place, nor do I ask every single client to just automatically tell me what their peaceful place is, because through the years I've had quite a number of clients now where they told me of the peaceful place and then they ended up going somewhere else.
Thanks.
You bet. It's a long answer to your question, but
That's interesting.
it still is okay if you want to ask a client to describe his or her peaceful place, but just be prepared that they might change peaceful places mid-trance. Any other questions or comments about the peaceful place? Okay. And I key in the idea that anytime I say go to your peaceful place, allow yourself to go there easily and quickly, and if this suggestion is acceptable at all levels of consciousness, please nod your head or move the yes finger. if I've already established idiomotor responses in a previous session. And see, that's next step. Establish or confirm idiomotor response signals. If you have not done it in a previous session, do it now. And if I have not asked the psychodynamic questions in a previous session, I will still set up the finger response questions, not to go through the psychodynamic questions, but because there are some yes or no questions I ask during regression. Wow, doesn't that pique your interest? Since I said earlier we need to be careful about asking yes or no questions. I'm against inappropriate leading. I'm not against appropriate leading, and it's appropriate leading to lead a client into release after you've done the necessary work. And I confirm release with finger response questions. But more about that when we get there. I also need to establish finger response questions before the last step of the preparation phase, which is verify hypnotic depth. And that's your sixth step. Unless a client attains sufficient trance depth, an analytical client could easily end up with no lasting results, as evidenced by my own experience as client several times. Unless a client is obviously in a somnambulistic state, use the 100-to-1 technique shown in the scripts section. Use whatever appropriate deepening techniques that are necessary to get the client deeper than 40 before initiating a hypnotic regression. Otherwise, the session might not be successful. So this 100-to-1 technique is back in the scripts section, page 28. And if some time has passed and you have a revised workbook, check in the table of contents of the workbook to see where the 100-to-1 technique is. The regular type, the Roman type, basically gives you instructions. The italics are more specific instructions. After appropriate induction and deepening, guide client to his or her safe place. After you establish or reconfirm idiomotor response signals, continue. So here's what I say to a client, what's in the bold. Now, imagine a scale of 100 to the number 1. The number 100 represents being awake, but with your eyes closed, while the number 1 is absolutely as deep as you can go in hypnosis without falling asleep. Notice how my non-verbal clues can actually serve to take a client deeper by slowing down the tempo and lowering my pitch and volume. And I have literally seen clients just drop off the somnambulism as I've done that. Now I'm going to ask a leading question. Appropriate leading, because I want to lead the client deeper than 50. 50 is halfway there. If you are 50 or deeper, please indicate by moving the yes finger. Sometimes I've noticed when the client moves the yes finger that the act of moving the yes finger tends to take them deeper. Now, this isn't black and white. It's not true for all the people all the time, but it's true for enough of my clients, enough of the time, that it's worth doing that. Sometimes I'll get a no, they're not deeper than 50. Sometimes I'll get an I don't know, which tends to indicate they're somewhere near 50, give or take a little bit. And this is subjective, not objective. If I get a yes, I continue. Are you 40 or deeper? If I get a yes, I'll continue. Are you 30 or deeper? And regardless of whether I get a yes, no, or I don't know, my next question is, are you deep enough to continue into the next part of this session?
What if they say I don't know?
If they say I don't know, if they're 30 or deeper, I'll say most people are deep enough when they're deeper than 30 to continue to the next phase. If they're between 40 and 30 and they give me I don't know, I'll do more deepening. Sometimes I'll make that determination intuitively. I may just give one or two more suggestions and then say the question again, are you now deep enough to continue the next phase of the session? And I have found that in most cases, with most of the clients most of the time, when the subconscious gives me a confirmation that it's okay to move into the next phase of the session, it's correct to do so. So very seldom do I have a non-productive regression like I did back in the 80s and early 90s before I started using the 100-to-1 technique. The very first time I saw this technique, it was called the yardstick technique, and it was by Sean Longacres, who is no longer on this planet. At the time I thought, oh, that's a crazy technique, and I couldn't picture myself ever using it. And I learned, you know, never say never, because the universe has a way of re-enrolling you in Basic Humility 101. And I don't like being re-enrolled in that course.
So have you used any convincers before this point?
It depends on the client.
Okay.
So sometimes clients go so deep so quickly that I don't have to. But I'm very quick to use a convincer when necessary. Now, if I get a no for 50 or 40, I'm going to use an additional deepener and a convincer. So let's say I get a no at 50. I'll say, I'm going to give you some additional suggestions to help you go deeper. Allow each suggestion that you accept to help you go deeper than you now are. And if this suggestion is acceptable at all levels of consciousness, please move the yes finger. Notice the client has now accepted the fact that every suggestion he or she responds to will take him or her deeper. Take a deep breath. And relax and go way down, deeper, deeper, until you reach your ideal level of hypnosis. And then I'll do a convincer after that. I like the arm levitation because that's worked very effectively for me through the years. And if I either forgot to ask permission to touch, or if the client wasn't comfortable with touch, then I'll use arm levitation without touch. And I'll say, now imagine one of your arms is getting lighter from the elbow to the fingertips, or one of your arms is getting heavier from the elbow to the fingertips, or both. And I don't know what's easier to imagine, the lightness or the heaviness, or both. But the more you imagine a lightness or heaviness, the greater the difference of feeling between your two arms. Neither force it nor resist it, just imagine the lightness or the heaviness and allow your subconscious to cause something interesting to happen. And as you go deeper, the light arm gets lighter or the heavy arm gets heavier. And the heavier your heavy arm or the lighter your light arm, the deeper you go. And I'm very closely observing the two hands. And if I notice a little bit of movement in one of the hands, as you find your light arm getting lighter, you go even deeper. And the slightest movement of your light arm helps you double the hypnosis or triple the trance. And if that arm starts floating off the arm of the chair, say, as you feel your arm floating right off the arm of the chair, you're going much deeper, totally convinced that you're in hypnosis, reaching your ideal depth. And if the arms don't move, as sometimes happens, I'll say something to the effect of, I don't know what's easier for you to imagine, the lightness or the heaviness, but if you can now feel the difference between your two arms, move the yes finger. And when they validate that there's a difference between the two arms, let both arms return to their normal weight. Are you now deeper than 50? Usually I'll get a yes. Very seldom do I get a no. Usually I'll get a yes. And then I go for the next level. Give another 1 or 2 suggestions to go deeper, then are you now 40 or deeper? And I will make 3 or 4 attempts to get that client deeper than 40. If I cannot get the client deeper than 40, the only way that client's going to have a regression that day is if I'm using affect bridge technique, because the affect bridge technique gets the client into emotions, which will get the client into the right brain. But if I have to use any other technique other than affect bridge, I will abort the regression session unless I can get that client deeper than 40. If I have to abort the the regression after making several attempts to get the client deep enough. I'll use compound suggestion, use suggestions and imagery from the first session based on whatever I did in the first session, and give additional compound suggestions and imagery that every time I hypnotize you, you go deeper than the time before until you reach your ideal depth. And there's a part of your subconscious that knows what your ideal depth level is. So right now, just imagine the deepest level of hypnosis that you can. And since imagination is a language of the subconscious, imagine you are already at your ideal level. And take a deep breath and go even deeper. And then I'll ask one last time, are you now 40 or deeper? If no, some suggestions you're going deeper next time. But for now, and then I'll go ahead and awaken the client. But I won't initiate the regression even if I get a yes on 40 or deeper unless there's still enough time left in the client's hour-long session to do that. I won't go over an hour unless I've asked permission in advance to go 90 minutes. I don't know about California, but in Washington State, a parent has only a 10 or 15-minute window to pick a child up after school. And not only that, we live very busy lives. People might have other places they need to be. So if I have a client scheduled from 2 to 3 and I go till 3:20, it could cost me a client. How do I know? Because about 2 or 3 years ago, when I asked a client if he had previous experience with hypnosis, yeah, I saw some guy in Seattle, but he was so full of himself that he thought nothing of keeping me in his chair for hour and a half. And I was late for a very important appointment because I didn't know he was going to keep me there that long. So she never went back and never told him why. So I ended up getting a client because somebody else went overtime without asking permission from the client. So if I know I'm going to do regression and I think there's a chance I might go overtime, I'll ask the client in advance, do I have permission to go overtime? I charge by the hour. If the client says, no, I'd rather not, then I will say, do you mind if I ask, is it financial or otherwise? If they say it's financial, then I'll say, if it's necessary to run a few minutes past, I'll do so on my dime, if that's okay with you. Because I'm client-centered. If the client can't afford to go 10 or 15 minutes overtime, but I feel I really need to, as long as I know the client doesn't have to be someplace else, I'll do that just as a professional courtesy. But if the client needs to be somewhere else, you better stop on time. And it's easier to do that with parts therapy than it is regression. However, because of that, I want to make sure that I have enough time left to do the regression by the time I get the client deep enough. So if it takes me too long to get them deeper than 40, and I see it's like 15 minutes to the end of the hour, I don't really have time to do quality regression. I want at least 20 to 25 minutes before I initiate a regression. Ideally, I like to have more than a half hour left by the time I get that client deep enough. How many of you have facilitated regressions in this room? That's quite a show of hands. You can appreciate why I like to have a half hour or more when possible. It's a lot more challenging to cut a regression short than it is parts therapy. I've had to do it a few times and then continue the regression next time, but it's not as easy as terminating a parts therapy session because you run out of time. So if you're wondering about that, that answer will come clear to you when I talk about the detour of running out of time in parts therapy.